Hello. Today let's talk about salvation. And I'll be focusing on Genesis 1:27 and Genesis 2:7. Now, the reason why I am focusing on Genesis to talk about salvation is because the salvation of man began right before man was created. So humanity as we are already in the process of salvation before we were even in existence. So Genesis 1:27 and Genesis 2:7 will be my focus. So in Genesis 1:27, hello, let's talk about salvation today. I'll be focusing on Genesis 1:27 and 26, and then I'll be focusing on Genesis 2:7. Now Genesis 1:27 says, God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And then Genesis 1:26 says, then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. And then in Genesis 2:7, he says, the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Now, the reason why I focus on Genesis in order to talk about salvation is because salvation is older than humanity. Salvation existed before God made us human beings. And everything that God did right from the beginning when he was creating us, and everything he has been doing over all the years, has been towards our ultimate salvation. And a process that we are going through right now began before we were even created. As you know, it clearly says in the Bible that Christ was crucified even before the humanity existed. So we were made in the likeness of God. God said, let us make man in our image. We were made in the likeness of God. Now, many times when people think about likeness, they think about the obvious things when it comes to likeness: appearance, behavior, interests and characteristics that we commonly see in our fellow human beings. So many people have talked about the fact that we have a body, we have a soul, or let's say a mind, and we have a spirit, and therefore we resemble God. We also have dominion over other creatures. He has given us authority and a responsibility to take over everything else that he created and govern them. And also we are able to make things, we are able to create things. So God called us co-creators. So in a way, that is resemblance to God. But the likeness to God goes deeper than that. The likeness of God goes as deep as the fact that God is everlasting. God does not have an end. And when he made us, he made sure we also do not have an end. What we call death is just another process. But the human being, the essence of the human being, does not cease to exist. And then another quality that he put in us for our salvation, which is his likeness, is righteousness. The very reason why we cannot be righteous on our own is because our righteousness does not come from us. It comes from God. To the extent that even the most wicked person somewhere in a prison has ever done something good. The very bad people that you hear of, somewhere they did something good. Because somewhere God's likeness was able to shine through whatever wickedness was possessing them. So he put in us righteousness. That is his likeness. Another thing that God put in us for our own salvation was victory. Because with God there is no failure. Even when you think that things have failed and nothing is working out, God is not shocked by situations or goings on that people get shocked by. So he puts in us his own victory because he is victorious all the time. That is part of his likeness. The only way we would lose that victory is by sin itself. And in order to remain victorious, we have to get deliverance from God himself. So our salvation was planned so that God puts what is of him in us, and then when it is damaged, he himself corrects it. Also, healing was put into us as part of God's likeness. Repair, something being rejuvenated, being returned to what it's supposed to be. Because with God, there is no damage, there is no aging, there is no sickness, there is no depletion. But with sin, there is destruction, there is aging, there is everything that we know, that we enjoy, gets spoiled at a certain point, gets rotten. But when you bring in God's might and God's power, then this destruction does not take place, or else if it has taken place, there is healing. And this is clearly demonstrated when the Ark of the Covenant had in it a rod that sprouted and even bore fruit. As we know commonly, when anything is a stick that has been used, a rod, that one is no longer going to grow, it's no longer going to yield. But when it comes to God, there is life right there. He will put it back. So that was part of our salvation, putting us right from the start. And all this he did so that we can live together with him as his children. But it was not mandatory for us to live with him. For that reason, he gave us a free choice. That is why either you decide you want to be God's child, or you decide you're not going to be God's child. There is nothing in between. You cannot pretend you are God's child and deceive yourself, because ultimately you will find that you have let yourself down. It's better to go with the truth. Either you are or you are not for a child of God. So how did God put all of this into us? In the beginning, when God created humanity, he said, let us make man in our image. But he picked up the soil and molded it into a human being, as we see from Genesis 2:7. He formed man from the ground itself. But after forming that soil into a human being, before it could take the full essence of what a human being should be, it had to receive what comes from God. What came from God? That breath is us. That breath is our spirit. That is the one that carries the likeness of God. So in reality, what God was doing is that he was creating a person out of himself and giving the person a place, a body to dwell in. That body he made out of soil, but that person he made out of his own breath. That is why you are legitimately his child. But not forgetting that you must make a choice. There is a choice to be made. Unfortunately, but of course not as a surprise to God, human beings sinned. The first human being disobeyed God and sinned, and so corrupted himself and corrupted his lineage. And sin became a part of humanity, flowing from our parents down to us, down to our children. But God had foreseen that there will be something that will attempt to destroy this human being that I'm going to make. So he planned for the salvation before and put a human being into a body that is soil, that in the end will go back to being soil, but then the human being will remain and be put into another body. This is why salvation is very important. Salvation is the only way through which you can ensure that when you get old and pass out of that body, you come back in another body. Because the very one who created that body gives you the choice to decide whether you will come back in a new body and he will put everything right in you, or whether you will go on your own and try to make a living on your own, which of course is a total failure. Let me make a simple illustration of this. Imagine a leaf on a tree. If a leaf on a tree decides to be independent, drop off the tree, what happens to that leaf? Definitely it will wither and it will die, because all of its life comes from the tree on which it grows. That is how we are as human beings. All of our life comes from God. And if we reject salvation, we reject life itself. But we are still of that nature that will not die. So what will happen? We will face death, that is death in the spirit form. Death that is no prosperity, that is no progress, that is nothing good, which we all call hell. That is death. Hell is death. Hell is death in the spirit. Hell is death for the spirit. Death for the physical body is not as bad as death for the spirit, because death for the spirit is everlasting. But death for the spirit, physical body, is a moment. So when God put his breath into a human being, he made it possible for a human being to come back to him and get corrected by him. So he can always come back to the human being and remold the human being. So by the death of Christ, a new salvation was created for the human being, so that when the human being realizes the need to be saved, the human being can ask for the salvation. It's just an asking for the salvation. It is not something very difficult that we must do, a certain set of rituals that we must follow, certain cultures that we must now adopt. It is asking God to day by day take over in your life. And when God takes over in your life, you will find a change in you. There are things that you will not even be interested in that you were interested in before. there are things that you'll be able to do that you were not able to do before. And you will lose this whole impending death that haunts a human being because of sin. When there's sin pursuing you, when there's sin possessing you, you feel death and then you become depressed. And many times people don't even know what keeps them miserable. It is because sin is taking over them, and sin is death. And they have not found the salvation that they need. Because I tell you truly, if you find the salvation, if you realize the truth, you will not worry about a single thing, and you will not be scared about anything, because you will find that your end is not anywhere near. You are not being defeated, and you are not failing. So instead of an entire human being being destroyed by sin, God made it so that the human body that he made out of soil is the one that will in the end be shed off. It's just a shedding off. He lets you live on earth. He lets you learn how to live as his child, because all through our lives we are learning how to be God's children. We are learning how to take care of what he has given us on this earth. We are learning how to make more out of what he has given us on this earth. By the way, we are supposed to make more out of everything that God gives us. Like the parable that Jesus Christ told, the one who buried his everything that he was given in the ground. It was not appreciated that he buried it and kept it and said, Master, I knew you. You are very terrible. I have to keep everything for you, because when you come back, you're going to demand of me whatever you gave me. And so I've kept it safely. Here it is. Didn't make anything out of it. God is telling us we should be on this earth and make something out of our lives. So we are learning how to live as God's children. And it is through this process, after we've asked him to take our lives into his care, that now he begins to teach us how to be his children. Learning how to be who we are supposed to be right from the start. So in short, what I'm saying is that God created us, human beings, in his image, and so he put in us everything that is necessary in order for us to live and realize that we need him to continue living. And once we've realized, to be able to receive from him, we have to be his own children, of his breath, so that we can receive his breath once again. So that even if our human bodies are destroyed by sin, over time, we are remade into the human beings that he intended us to be right from the start. Because nothing surprises him. He already foresaw and planned for everybody's salvation. That is why hell was not made for any human being. Should a human being end up in hell, that was a big blunder they made. A big blunder. Because for every human being, there is an opportunity to understand that you should ask God to deliver you. Even if it's a very short moment to realize you should ask God, please take that moment and ask God to deliver you. So time is our gift that we should use when we realize we are sinners. Over time, we will be able to ask God's forgiveness, ask that he takes over our life, ask for Jesus Christ to come into our heart, so that we can live as God's children, and so that we can reap the blessing that comes from relying on God, who is our source of life. Because if we do not rely on God, we will be like that leaf that fell off the tree and ultimately will be destroyed. God intends to make us into new human beings. So we have to trust Him and call upon Him in our lives. Have a good day.